So anyway, let's move right along here, and consistent with this opening statement about not knowing exactly what the soul is, I just want to look at a couple of different ideas about the soul before we actually move into a discussion of the relationship between Carl Jung and Freud. When we actually, the soul itself is one of those what would be called elementary ideas, and Jung would call it an archetype. And an elementary idea, this is 19th century anthropological terminology, an elementary idea is an idea that can be found everywhere. The soul is one of those ideas. The hero is another one of those ideas. The concept of a holy power. These are all elementary ideas because you can find them in almost any culture that you look at. But they don't come in pure form. Each one of them comes inflected through a local, provincial, ethnic idea. So they always come in the costume of their local ethnic guises. And each ethnic version of the hero will emphasize, for example, the hero will emphasize different aspects about what heroism means, for example, to this culture versus what it means to that one. And they may not agree about the specific values or ethics of the hero's contribution, but nonetheless, we should be able to step back and look at the concept of the hero as a whole and see how it functions, or whether it functions, in fact, the same, no matter what culture we're talking about. And so with respect to the elementary idea or the archetype of the soul, I just want to look briefly at a couple of different versions of that idea, just so that we get a sense of when we discuss the idea soul, that we really don't know what it is, because nobody has ever really agreed on exactly what its nature is. Plato, for example, the Platonic vision of the soul is that the soul pre-exists the genesis of the body and survives its dissolution. So the soul is this immortal entity that is making the rounds, just as it does in India, except that even there it is consistent with the Greek imagination that it carries the personality with it and the shape of the body and so forth. And we are to imagine, for example, the Greek cosmos is geocentric. The earth is in the center of creation, and it is this unmovable marble. And surrounding it are these various envelopes of concentric crystalline spheres, and they're made out of this substance called ether. And ether has the natural propensity to turn with perfect, undissipated circular motion. And as Plato says, the soul is in the form of a circle. So circle is the perfection. It is the archetype of the soul as far as Plato is concerned. And Plato was a geometer, so he was very much interested in looking at the world through the lens of mathematics and geometry. So he says the soul drops down from its abode in the empyrean, and as it drops through each of these envelopes, and within each one of these spheres is a tiny planet, and as the sphere itself turns, it carries the planet along with it on its tracks along the ecliptic, the zodiac. So this is responsible for the planets themselves are not moving, they're being pulled along in these gigantic transparent spheres. And the soul, as it drops down on its journey toward Earth, picks up the various qualities that are associated with each of those planets. It's a very notion that's consistent with the astrological idea, that each of these planets is a kind of archetypal entity, and the soul picks up the nature of that archetype as it passes through Venus. It picks up the erotic. As it passes through Mars, we pick up our aggressive tendencies. As we pass through Mercury, we pick up our intellect, and so forth. So that by the time the individual is born, the soul has come equipped with an entire map of the cosmos and all of the archetypes. And it got very complex too, because in later systems that picked up on this, they started assigning different notes of the diatonic scale to each of the spheres, and different disciplines of the trivium and the quadrivium, and so forth. So that the idea of an education in the Platonic view was that you were actually reawakening the knowledge that you had before you were born. It's a little bit like the Zen koan, the face you had before you were born. At the moment of birth, it's forgotten completely because of the density of the layering that has taken place over the soul. It's wrapped in these envelopes. And this density of materiality has obscured our contact with this inward harmony, the music of the spheres. And so the job of an education properly is to reconnect the mind with the knowledge of that harmony of the cosmos. It's already within us. But then as the body drops off in death, the soul returns back up through these spheres to pursue its destiny, possibly for reincarnation, depending on who what Platonic scholar you ask. Plato is extremely difficult to pin down, very much like James Hillman. He seems to contradict himself, and he's always trying out new versions of the same story, so it's very hard to pin him down. But we can generally say that his vision of the soul is that it pre-exists the body, lives within the body, strives to know itself through education, and then survives and becomes, it isn't this immortal entity. Now, Plato's pupil was, as you know, Aristotle, and Aristotle completely disagreed with this theory in almost every respect. Aristotle was not a mathematician. He was a biologist primarily, and he had a much more concrete relationship to the physical world around him, and he really founded the natural sciences in the concrete aspect of looking at how particular things work and classifying organisms and so forth. And his theory of the soul correspondingly is that it does not involve immortality at all. The soul is a process that is living through us while we are alive. The soul does not exist independently of the body. He says the soul is the form of the body. The soul is form, the body is matter. Matter cannot exist without an indwelling entelechy, or a soul, that animates it and causes it to do the things that it desires to do, which in most cases is to bring forth that which is in a state of potentiality into actuality. So the soul for Aristotle is this process of maturation and growth. It is what brings the tree out of the acorn, and what brings the old man out of the infant. So we are to think of it as this process that is very much wedded to the body. And the ultimate cause, according to Aristotle, of this dynamic entity, this entelechy that is living through us, is that each one of these entelechies is inspired by or strives for God. And Aristotle's idea of God is an extremely puzzling, hyper-rationalistic concept. He doesn't personify it at all. He just says, God is the unmoved mover. It is the being who is not potential. It is the being which is in a state of total actualization. All predicates can be attributed to it. There is nothing that it is striving for. It is perfect within itself. And as a result of that desire for the soul in the earthly plane to perfect itself, it is automatically striving to, as an arrow, to shoot for the target of God, which is pure perfection. Then later the Christians will come in and begin fusing these two together, particularly when Aristotle is rediscovered during the Middle Ages at about the time of the creation of the universities, and then we start getting Thomas Aquinas and the fusion of Christianity with the rationalism of Aristotle. So Aristotle's conception of the soul is that it is that living monad within us that is striving to know itself. And we will find that this is, out of all these archaic concepts, this is the one that is the closest to the Jungian conception of the soul, which he calls the self, and which Hillman will later just revert back to using the word as soul. It is, Jung was asked in an interview if his conception of the soul was basically what Aristotle meant by the entelechy, and he said yes, it's more or less the same thing. So then when we look at the Christian conception of the soul, we have this idea that the soul does survive the death of the body, but strangely it does not pre-exist it. It comes into being when the infant is in the mother's womb. And there's a beautiful illustration that I did not bring with me, but wanted to, of Hildegard of Bingen's vision of a pregnant woman with, you can see the embryo within her and this long tube coming down from heaven, and she is surrounded by this egg-like envelope. It looks very much like a sperm fertilizing an egg, the later scientific illustrations of it, but she could not, of course, have gotten that knowledge, but yet here it is. And so you begin to wonder about theories of mythology, whether they can actually give us pictures of biological processes that are going on within us. And it's a wonderful image of this embryo of the soul traveling down this pipeline from heaven and entering into the unborn infant. So the Christian conception there is that we have the soul does survive the death of the body, but does not pre-exist it. So those are the three major Western ideas of the soul. And then when we look over to the Far East, we find that there are similar ideas there, and the elementary idea of the soul certainly does exist there. But when we contrast the Eastern conception with the Western conception generally, we find there even some major disagreements.